The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL.
Tell me if you've heard this before. The Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs are playing in the AFC playoffs and in the AFC Championship game.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Joe, this is a huge game, obviously. We joked about it beforehand. Really nothing going on in this game, right? I mean, not playing for anything.
Yeah, it's a big one, fellas, and nice to do this twice a year with you guys. It's part of life these days. So that's part of the deal. The Chiefs have obviously set the standard in the National Football League, not just the AFC. And 7 years in a row, they've been in this game. 6 times they've hosted it. And the Bills have their opportunity right now to knock off the Chiefs. And obviously they failed the previous 3 times in doing so. Go back to that 2020 AFC Championship game. The Bills had that early lead, but boy, did it go away very quickly. And felt like Kansas City was certainly ahead of the Bills at that time. They were well into their Patrick Mahomes era, and it just didn't feel like the Bills were ready. And then you get to the next one, and, well, that was 13 seconds. And I think that the real story there, from like you're wanting to get into the Bills side of this history, it's that the Bills had the capacity to win the game. It wasn't that they couldn't do it. It was very much circumstantial. Now it's their fault. They blew 13 seconds, but it wasn't a capacity issue. It wasn't that they couldn't beat Kansas City. And I'd say the same thing about what happened last year in Buffalo, where I thought the Bills, more than anything, let Kansas City off the hook, had certainly their opportunities to put them away. They had some drops and missed a field goal and weren't able to put them away and let them off the hook. And so here they are again. The Bills have certainly had the answers in the regular season. They've won the last 4, a couple of those by multiple scores, but it's empty. It doesn't mean anything. This is the one that matters, and this is the opportunity ahead of the Buffalo Bills.
And it's almost a comfort to have this matchup, because when we go to training camp every year, in the back of our mind, we have this Bills team. It's just the way that it's gone since 2020. And it's comforting to know that they both got here and things worked out, quote unquote, like they should. But the matchups are really, really interesting. And I think that the progression of both of these teams comes to a head. Some similarities this year that really stand out to me, with a lot of youth, a lot of change on the defensive side for both teams. The wide receiver groups have been turned over, so to speak. Obviously, with Shakir leading the Bills group, Xavier Worthy, for all intents and purposes, has been the one guy who's been there all season for the Chiefs, another rookie. I find that really intriguing, that these established veteran quarterbacks have to continue to try to manufacture something new and different. And I think that evolution is what brings it back and keeps it a close game. I expect another one. What stands out to you in terms of matchups with either the passing game or anything else that stands out to you?
Yeah, quite a bit. I mean, when you think about this game, I don't really find as much concern on the offensive side of the football for Buffalo, where I think they're going to have some good opportunities to score and move the ball. It really comes back to the defense. The defense has been the unit that's let Buffalo down in these matchups. And what's going to be different this time? That's the question I keep going back to. And they just hadn't been able to affect Patrick Mahomes at all. He hasn't registered a turnover-worthy throw in 3 playoff matches previously. He's got a 75% completion percentage. He's throwing for over 300 yards a game. He's got a passer rating of 125 in these postseason games, which are crazy different from the regular season. There's nothing pedestrian or human about Patrick Mahomes, but his regular season splits against Buffalo absolutely are. He's a regular quarterback, not in the postseason. And I guess that's probably the story of Patrick Mahomes really of late, where it's just the flip switches, and he's tough to beat and he's tough to put away. I mean, that doesn't happen very often. And so the Bills, from a matchup perspective, have got to figure out how to affect Patrick Mahomes. And in week 11, they certainly did. I thought they did a phenomenal job with their cage rush, incorporating a spy mirror type look. They did some dime stuff, but dime not necessarily in the traditional sense of 3 down linemen, 2 linebackers, 6 defensive back look. They broke that out and they sprinkled it in a few times since. And so, those are the jabs, right? I think you can look at those as jabs, but it's all about counter punches. And obviously the Chiefs have had the counter punches in the postseason. I think the Bills have set those early jabs and maybe landed a few right hooks, win those the regular season game. But who has the answers in the postseason? So far, it's been Kansas City. And so I'm very interested in how the Bills can affect Patrick Mahomes in ways that they haven't been able to in the postseason before. Now, I think they're healthy on defense in ways that they haven't, which is probably going to be helpful, but it's all about who shows up on Sunday in Arrowhead.
You know, you bring up your offense and you bring up the Bills, and looking at Josh Allen, looking at how he's played this season, he has played at an MVP level the entire year. He hasn't turned the ball over in a very long time, and that is part of what has made this Bills team, so dangerous. What have you seen that's been different from him this season, and more specifically later in the season and into the playoffs, that has really kind of fueled their run and kept them going in the right direction to get into this game?
Yeah, there's just not negative plays. That's what it comes down to. This is the best quarterback season since 1970 in terms of fewest percentage of plays that are interceptions or sacks. He takes care of the football. It's a different Josh Allen. He's playing with efficiency, and it's rooted in the overhaul that they've had to their offensive skill players, right? It's no longer, well, you got to feed the ball to Stephon Diggs 15 times, or you have to get Gabe Davis his touches because he's a legit number 2 receiver. That's not the case at all. In fact, if you were to look up and down this Bills receiving core and the receiving output this year, there's nothing that's going to stand out to you. It's a bunch of dudes that have caught between 20 and 50 passes, like 10 of them, right? And so he just tries to do the smart right thing with the football. And I think what's been exciting is watching Josh Allen this year and this Bills team is that every win doesn't look the same. There's some games where Josh goes out and he'll throw 4 or 5 touchdowns, get the AFC Offensive Player of the Week. And there's games like last week where he just needed to go out there and go 16 to 22, not turn over the ball, compress the game, get the heck out of there with a win. The scripts are very different. They've shown a lot of different ways that they can win, whether that's run heavy, pass heavy, big plays on defense. And so I think that's the mark of a great team. It's just a matter of, okay, well, now you're going up against Kansas City. And the thing about Kansas City is they just know how to win. There's no style points with Kansas City this year. Not at all. But they know how to score more points at the end of the game, especially in the postseason. And so what's the script look like? Is this a situation where both teams try to compress this game, or is someone going to go after it and go get it? And if they do, is that going to be the right idea? That's what Sean McDermott and Andy Reid got to figure out. But there's a lot of dynamics to this matchup that I think, while there's been a lot of familiarity, of course, this is a standalone opportunity that I think is going to present some unique challenges for both teams.
I think you're absolutely right. And the way that they go about it, I think being different, being multiple, both run games are a little bit more impressive this year. Honestly, if I was going to pick one guy to be nervous about, it's either return of Kincaid, who didn't play in the last matchup, or Cook. And I love the fact that both these quarterbacks now have a run game they can lean on a little bit and take some of that pressure off, but it does widen the margin of what the possibilities are. And I think that just breeds another game that's going to come down to the last possession, maybe the last play. Let's hope that it's not a kick. That's all I'm asking for.
Yeah, no kicks. This is the deal. No, these kickers, stay out of it. Referees, stay out of it. Let's let these players, these quarterbacks, these teams that have earned the opportunity to be there, be the ones that decide this game. Hopefully when everyone's having their overreaction afterwards, that we're talking about things that aren't kickers and referees.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of the most fun evenings this year was me and my wife getting a chance to go out. The excitement, the energy, it's unforgettable. It's unmistakable. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
It's time for Aaron Glenn to get to work.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast.
Well, the New York Jets have their next head coach. It is Aaron Glenn, a guy who was a great player for the Jets. He played with the team between 1994 and 2001, then spent a couple years in the scouting department about a decade ago, and now he's coming back. He is the next Jets head coach, and Aaron Glenn needs to hit the ground running. Even though it's January, there is a lot of work to be done. And on today's show, we're going to talk about what I think are the top priorities for Aaron Glenn. Now, Here's what I think the number one priority for Glenn is. And it's the same priority I would give for any coach. And through the coaching process, through the process of all the interviews, I've used a phrase over and over and what I want in the next head coach of the Jets. And that is a culture changer. Because right now, the culture of the New York Jets is not very good. And the culture of the New York Jets has not been very good for a long time. It was bad under Robert Saleh, but to be fair, it was bad before Robert Saleh was here. Just kind of picking up where I left off yesterday when I did a special bonus show on Glenn, I think the New York Jets are an organization where too frequently excuses are made. During the Patriots dynasty, well, how can we win? We're up against this historic dynasty. Well, the Patriots dynasty is gone now, and the Jets still aren't winning. The Jets are a team that I just get the feeling, and this may start at the top with the owner, they feel bad for themselves when bad things happen. And one of the things that excites me about Aaron Glenn is this year a lot of bad things happened to the Detroit Lions, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which was the unit Glenn ran. And you never really know how somebody is going to handle the jump up from coordinator to head coach. It's a different job. But when adversity struck that team, Aaron Glenn said, we're not going to feel sorry for ourselves. The next guy up needs to play well. That's just how it is. I think that a lot of Jets fans kind of roll their eyes when they hear talk about culture, because culture is a very nebulous word used in the context of building an NFL team. And I think part of the issue is that the Jets talk about culture a lot. Joe Douglas's introductory press conference back in 2019 said, we're going to build the best culture in sports. Culture is like one of those phrases the Jets have used through the years as an excuse to not win. They say, well, it's okay, we're not winning because we're building a culture. And in fairness, a lot of teams use that as an excuse. They'll say we're rebuilding, we're building a culture. Well, the most important part of building a culture is winning. And it's about holding people accountable. And the New York Jets, over the last several years, one of the problems with this team is that they don't address problems. They ignore problems. They always look for like one solution that's going to solve everything. And that was especially pronounced through this year. This past season in 2024, it felt like the Jets always felt like they were one magical move away from being a Super Bowl team. That's why they fired Robert Saleh. Everything was Robert Saleh's fault after week 5. Then the next week, everything was Mike Williams' fault. So Mike Williams was demoted after the Devontae Adams trade, and then was eventually sent along to the Pittsburgh Steelers at the trade deadline. And you look at the Jets last year, and you saw that one of the issues is that, Greg Zuerlein is a perfect example, because Greg Zuerlein was missing kicks all season long. Now, would it be fair to say Greg Zuerlein was the sole reason the Jets were bad last year? And if only they had a good kicker, they would have been a playoff team? Absolutely not. I've heard some people make that argument, but look at what the Jets did on the offensive side of the ball. Look what the Jets did on the defensive side of the ball. Look at the caliber of coaching the Jets had. I think it's ridiculous to say that the Jets were a good team if they had decent kicking. It's just not fair to say. But it is fair to say that Greg Zuerlein was a problem last year. The Greg Zuerlein missed a lot of makeable kicks, and those kicks were part of the reason the Jets lost a lot of close games. They weren't the only reason. Look, the Jets lost a lot of close games because their offense didn't play well, their defense didn't play well. When you lose close games, it never comes down to really one factor. But Greg Zuerlein was clearly a problem. But you didn't see any move with Greg Zuerlein until it was like they ran out of scapegoats. Because how can you get rid of the kicker if everything's Robert Saleh's fault? How can you get rid of the kicker if everything's Mike Williams' fault? And the Jets just go down the line and they act like there's one solution heading into the season. Nathaniel Hackett wasn't an issue because Aaron Rodgers was going to fix everything. And this stuff doesn't work. And one of my complaints through the years with the Jets has been that they ignore problems. They don't address problems. They just try and wish them away, or they think that they can work around problems instead of addressing them head on. And this is something Aaron Glenn, I hope, will change. It's tough to say how Glenn will attack this, because you're going into an organization where a lot of the dysfunction starts at the top with the ownership. I think most people would agree with that. But we just need the Jets to have a different outlook on things, because we've seen this over and over. I mean, one of my complaints with Robert Saleh was, there were reports in 2023 that once Aaron Rodgers went down, Saleh just kind of gave up on the season. Back in 2019 with Adam Gase, Sam Darnold got mono the first couple of weeks. If you listen to Adam Gase, it was almost like he couldn't understand why anybody would expect him to need to try and win games. It just goes on and on with the Jets, where it's a team where excuse making is okay, where losing can be explained, where people not doing their job don't need to be replaced. These are things that need to change if the Jets want to get good. When you talk about reason the Jets are bad, it's complex. When you've missed the playoffs 14 straight years, there's not one single reason, and there's not one single person to blame for that. But I think what's clear is that culturally, there have been problems here where people have not been held to account. Accountability is a buzzword. I know that it can mean different things to different people. But at the end of the day, I don't think you can say that poor performance or losing have been treated the right way in this organization. So this is one of the reasons I'm excited about Aaron Glenn, despite the caveats, despite understanding that there's a lot of work to be done, despite understanding that Aaron Glenn's going to have to grow into the job. I think with any first-time head coach, there will be growing pains. There will be learning moments. But what I like about Aaron Glenn is that he's a guy who goes out there and demands excellence from his players. And my hope is that that's what he'll start doing with the Jets, because the way the Jets turn this around is they need to stop making excuses. I think that there have been too many excuses made for this team through the years. And that's got to change. And when I say too many excuses, I'm not talking about you or me. I'm talking about internally. Bad performance is not punished. And I hope that that's what will change with Aaron Glenn. There are a lot of things that need to be fixed with this team, but I think that's at the top of the list. The New York Jets have a new head coach, and it's a familiar name if you're a Jets fan. Aaron Glenn, who was a fantastic Pro Bowl corner for this team from 1994 through 2001, is now the Jets head coach. And Glenn drew a lot of notoriety in the NFL this season for his work with a Detroit Lions defense, which was decimated by injury. And I think it's probably an understatement to say that Aaron Glenn's defense in Detroit was decimated by injury. It was unbelievable how many guys the Lions lost. In fact, in many cases over the last couple of weeks, I've referred the defense that Detroit put on the field in some of these games to a fourth quarter of a preseason game type of defense. I mean, they were going so deep into the well, finding backups, signing guys off the street. Aaron Glenn now takes a different challenge. It's rebuilding a Jets team that really has not gone anywhere in a long time. Now, I think one of the benefits with Glenn is that he comes from a team in Detroit where they kind of took over a similar task. Now, Lions had some solid seasons through the 2010s with Matthew Stafford at quarterback, but the Lions are a franchise that's been very down on its luck. The Lions have never been to a Super Bowl. Jets at least have been to one Super Bowl, even if it was over 50 years ago. And when Glenn took over the Lions defense and Dan Campbell took over as Lions head coach, they had to do some of the things I was talking about in the first segment. They had to establish a culture. Now Glenn's in charge of the Jets. And one of the things that will be interesting will be to see how he handles the transition from coordinator to coach. And I think there are a couple of different ways he can do this. He can essentially remain the de facto defensive coordinator. I'm not going to I want to make it clear. I'm drawing a distinction between what Jeff Ulbrich did, where Jeff Ulbrich pretty much left the entire task up to himself, where Ulbrich was in charge of the defensive game planning and play calling. A lot of head coaches remain focused on their side of the ball. And, they keep the play calling duty and they're involved in the game planning. But, a coach like a Sean McVay or a Kyle Shanahan, they're obviously very involved with their offense, but they do have assistants they delegate to. So and it's kind of goes the same way with the other side of the ball. Robert Saleh, he delegated to Jeff Ulbrich. We know that Ulbrich had something to do. Maybe not after the performance when Saleh was fired. We can question whether how much Ulbrich had to do with it. But we know Saleh did delegate some things to Ulbrich. Then your coaches like Glenn came from in Detroit, Dan Campbell, who essentially hired his offensive coordinator, hired his defensive coordinator, and was kind of like the guy who oversaw everything. And there are pros and cons to doing things either way. If you are a talented play caller, well, that's part of what you're bringing to the table to the team as a head coach. So would you like to deprive your team of that? On the other hand, and Jeff Ulbrich, such an extreme example, maybe this helps visualize it, but you don't want to be stretched too thin. You want to be able to focus on overseeing the big picture. You want to make sure that you're coaching the coaches properly, that you're supervising them properly, that the game plans on both sides of the ball are acceptable. And you also want to make sure that your team plays complementary football, because there are some weeks where your offense and defense need to play together. A good example of that would be what happened in Detroit this season, where there were games where the Lions got much more aggressive on offense than they otherwise would have been. And Dan Campbell was behind it because he said, you know what, we're banged up on defense. We need our offense to carry the load. And there are situations where a team is relying on its defense. Maybe it needs its offense to, not make as many mistakes. So the question comes down to this: is what kind of head coach does Glenn want to be? Does he want to be more like a CEO style, like a Dan Campbell or a John Harbaugh? Or does he want to take a bigger role on defense and delegate more of the offense to the people he brings in? An early indication could be who he hires as defensive coordinator, because at the point I'm recording this podcast, and of course these things are fluid, it could change. But at the point I'm recording this podcast, there has not yet been a hire for defensive coordinator. There have been rumors that a coach, Steve Wilks, could be Glenn's choice. The two of them have ties going back. Wilks was most recently the defensive coordinator of the 49ers and was let go after the 2023 season, despite the team putting up some very impressive numbers defensively. Wilks is a former head coach in the league. He was the interim head coach of the Panthers a couple of years back after Frank Reich was fired. He also had a one-year stint, which didn't go very well with the Arizona Cardinals. And yesterday, when I did my bonus show, I mentioned the idea that the idea of Glenn bringing in a former head coach as an assistant is something I think would be a positive, because I just think it's good to have a sounding board. And even somebody who wasn't successful as a head coach, he at least knows what it's like to be a head coach. And he may know some of the pitfalls Glenn's falling into, because he experienced them himself in Arizona when he was one and done. He can tell Glenn, this is what happened in Arizona. This is what we want to avoid. But beyond that, Wilks is it would be a pretty big hire as a defensive coordinator. And perhaps that's a sign that, maybe Glenn wants to delegate his defense. He wants to bring in someone he trusts and just delegate that, and then he can oversee the big picture. There's no real right or wrong way to do these things. You have coaches who are excellent, who really focus on their side of the ball and pretty much delegate everything to the other side of the ball to somebody else. Then you have your coaches who again are the more CEO style, who really want to focus on the big picture.
From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting, especially if you're like me and your team's not in it anymore. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. The NFC Championship features two dynamic rushing offenses facing off. The two quarterbacks, always a threat to run, but FanDuel likes one to run a lot more. Jaden Daniels has a total rushing over-under at 54.5, which is a lot more than Jalen Hurts, 29.5, though. Jalen Hurts, a lot of tush-push stuff. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Shad Khan released a statement that Trent Baalke is no longer the Jaguars general manager.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast.
Trent Baalke fired as Jaguars GM. I saw some stuff from some national people saying, what in the hell is going on with Jacksonville? Okay, well, welcome to the show. This is not, you mean this is the threshold where you finally ask that question? Don't get this twisted. For those who are around here, this is a day of reckoning. This is the day that they finally realize that, no, we got to scrape all of it out. Okay? So to somebody else that doesn't follow the team closely, and then the national guys, this is why we tell y'all all the time, you got to pay attention to local, man, because the national people are saying, I'm just looking at them like, this is what makes you wonder what's going on here. And that's the disconnect that people who don't follow this team closely enough have. So welcome to the party. I'm glad you're here. But on a day when you are flabbergasted about what is happening in Jacksonville, people in Jacksonville are like, hallelujah. And first of all, I'm going to say this, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. This is not a celebration that Trent Baalke lost his job. This is a celebration that our owner finally understands that though you might like Trent Baalke, what he has been doing is not, I repeat, is not anything you need to be paying attention to going forward. All right. Nobody's here to say, okay, somebody needs to come in here and figure out how to work with you and Trent and figure out what y'all doing wrong. The Jaguars are at a point where you go, thank you for your service, but we need to move in a totally different direction. And the direction we have to move in has to be with new people who are going to be in lockstep and work together. We ain't got time to have this baggage. And see, I always said, when you in one relationship and you move on to somebody else, don't be talking about what you used to do. Don't be hurt about what used to. That's gone. If you're gonna take a swing at something new, man, you got to be vulnerable and willing to realize that you might make a mistake again. But the more you talk about what used to be, that's baggage, whether it's good or bad. And that is why a clean break had to happen. So this is not a celebration of Trent. This is more or less a celebration that the owner now realizes. And he had to probably learn some hard lessons, because there's going to be some speculation that I'm going to give you here in just a second. These are some hard lessons, and we had to watch it on full display. And there are things that everybody knew that about a month ago, it was like, who's going to tell him? Who's going to tell him? And then when people asked him in the interview with Trent, they were basically trying to tell him, and he scoffed at it. Almost, in my opinion, like, what are you talking about? We're going to fire 85 people. Y'all remember all that stuff. I ain't trying to bring it all back up and come down on the dude, but that's basically what happened. And then today he saw the light. Whether he saw it because of what you all said, whether he saw it because it was obvious to everyone else, whether he saw it because he hit rock bottom, and that rock bottom was people telling him, no, I ain't going to do it. Not like that, right? And if that's not the case, he didn't say that in the statement. The statement kind of said that they had been talking all throughout the week. And then, I don't know, see, this is the weird part. I'm going to read it, man. I'm going to go back to it just to make sure I don't say this wrong. It said something to the effect of, we've been talking about it, all week. Just so I get this right, because I have to get this right, because I don't want to make it seem like here I'm coming down on the dude too bad. But it was just something in here that makes me think like, okay, this is what we've been talking about all week, but it's going to be effective immediately. Okay. If y'all figured it out and it came to the best thing, whatever we had to get to this point, that's where we are. The Jags are going to get a new GM, and Ethan Waugh is going to be the interim GM. Don't know if he's going to stay. Don't know if he's going to go or whatever. But it appears that the Jaguars had a problem, and now they've identified. Well, they identified some of it, and then instead of sitting here fragmenting it, trying to figure out what part of it's wrong, like they have been doing, now they've been forced to do a little bit of self-diagnosis, and that self-diagnosis, in my opinion, is what led us to where we are. Thank you, Trent, for doing the best job you could here in Jacksonville. No hard feelings. I wish you the absolute best, the same way I did to Doug Peterson, the same way I did the year before to some coaches that I personally knew. And it's always hard. It's always hard because you think about those folks, but this is never personal. And that's one of the things that I try to do on the show every day. And I know some people can't catch it all the time, but one theme I always have is I make sure the things that I say can be timestamped. I have been talking about having a quarterback coach combination and having a GM coach combination and having a chain of command where there's one voice for this organization. I have been talking about that for years. So that way everyone knows that this isn't personal, and everyone knows this isn't about me just trying to be right from my office up here on North Main Street. That's not the thing. It is always about you, the fan. So what I've always tried to do over the years is as we grow together and as we both learn more and more about this team, I try to be super, super transparent about how I feel so we can all be smarter together. I know it's not a monologue, it's a bit of a dialogue every day, but I want you to feel smarter when you leave. So that's why today it seems like almost a reckoning for the fans in the city, because we have kind of been on this journey together where we suffer, We grieve. We come on here and we talk about the team, but make no mistake about it, even argue back and forth on social media. But the one thing that is common is I know you and I all want the same thing. And that's for this city and this team to be looked at and viewed as winners, because we know that's who we are. And we think Shad really is, because he's won at everything. But it's just so hard to watch every single time when you know, and I can't be quiet about it, when you know something isn't right. They didn't have one voice. They did not seem like they were on one track. Listening to Doug almost say nothing sometimes on the podium means that he wanted to say something, but he probably knew it wasn't in his best interest to do it. We did not hear from Baalke much. Y'all remember this day? You remember the day Doug Marrone said him and Jalen were fine and they live in the same neighborhood? You remember I was in there and I asked him, you and Jalen are okay? Y'all ain't got no problems. He said no. Eventually, at some point, I don't know if it was that day or another day, Doug said, I wish the people that had those problems would come down here and talk to you. And that's how I feel today. I feel like there's a bit of that same division, but instead of Doug, who's like the cab driver from New York, that's just going to say whatever he wants to say, the other Doug, Peterson, held it in and just took it on the chin. But now we've gotten here. What does it mean moving forward? It means to me, I think this makes this job the attractive job that we all know it is and can be. It means that the owner, in my opinion, has been humbled a little bit. And I think it is right for somebody that really, really loves football and loves the grind and loves how this is supposed to go and loves building people and making them come together for a greater cause. And that is more than the staff. That is more than the 53 and more than all of them combined with the practice squad. It's about galvanizing that building all in to go in one direction. And when they do that, that what comes with that will permeate through the fan base, and it'll go back to these communities, and we'll all get back on the train again. And you know what? I think they can do it. I really do. I hope they can do it. But this is the beginning. They have cleaned that thing all the way down.